8. O Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth. You've set your glory above the heavens. Out of the mouth of babies and infants you have established strength because of your foes to still the enemy and the avenger. Let's stop for a moment right there with verse 1 and ask ourselves a question. Why is God's name so majestic? Anybody any thoughts? All right. And jumping ahead a little bit, and that's exactly where the psalmist goes, but that's the point that I want to make, is we don't have any way of knowing how majestic God is. Even if we concede that there is a God, what do we know about God?
Only what He's revealed.
Only what He's revealed, and the primary source of that revelation when it comes to His power, when it comes to His glory, when it comes to His majesty, is through the things which have been made. Notice what it goes on to say, how majestic is your name in all the earth. You have set your glory above the heavens. In other words, He's greater than the things that we marvel at. You've set your glory above the heavens. Out of the mouth of babies and infants you've established strength. Because how do we know that God has strength? How many universes have you made? How many planets and stars do you hold in their place? You ever formed anything out of the dust of the earth? I have when I was a kid. What do we call them? Mud pies. We played in the dirt and we made mud pies and we were proud of our mud pies, and when we were done they were what? Lumps of mud. You know what God did? God reached down and took some dust of the earth and did what? Fashioned it into a man. That's how we know the strength of God. The earth, what's the earth suspended on? There's nothing physical holding the earth in place. How great is the power of gravity? I want you to think about this. When I was doing training in judo on a regular basis, one of the things that our instructor used to remind us constantly is nothing is stronger than gravity. That's the strongest force you're going to go against. And he was actually teaching us to use it to our advantage. But where's gravity come from? Where's this force, this powerful force that holds everything in the universe in its place? Where's it come from? God. That's how we see the strength of God. The most powerful force that we know emanates from Him, comes from Him, doesn't exist without Him. Out of the mouth of babies and infants you have established strength because of your foes to still the enemy and the avenger. Because of His strength, I can trust in His ability to provide the promises that He's made, to be a protector and to guard those who are His and to provide for those who are His. He spoke the world into existence. He made the plants that produce food. Can He provide for me food when He says, I'll provide for you food? Yes. I don't need to doubt that. Why? Because I know He acted in creation. We talked about this a little bit when we read Genesis 1. Does Genesis 1 record every single event, every single thought, every single thing that happened over the course of those 7 days? No. It records only that which is necessary for me to understand that God is responsible for everything that I see and for everything that I experience. in my time on the earth. Knowing that enables me to know something about the majesty, the glory, the power of God. So listen to what the psalmist goes on to say. When I look at your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars, which you have set in place. What is man that you're mindful of him, and the Son of Man that you care for him? Here I am, one little creature, walking on one little planet that's part of a little solar system around a relatively small star that has a moon surrounding us. But we talk about how little our solar system is and how relatively small the sun is compared to other stars and other things in the universe. The fact of the matter is, what am I compared to them? In mass, in physical presence. What is man that you take thought in him? That's the question. You've made him a little lower than the heavenly beings or than the angels. Crowned him with glory and honor. Man has been crowned with glory and honor. Why? You've given him dominion over the works of your hands. You've put all things under his feet, all sheep and oxen, also the beasts of the field, the birds of the heaven, the fish of the sea, whatever passes along the paths of the seas. Why? Why is man in control? Why does man have dominion over all of these other created things? How do we know that? We're told that in Genesis 1. That's the only way we know that. That's the only way it makes sense. The psalmist is asking, why is it that man is considered by you? Why is it that you're mindful of him and you care for him? Why isn't that you've given him dominion? The answers to those questions are seen in the process of creation itself. That's why we're told what we're told in Genesis 1. That is a foundational circumstance that explains the order of things as God has placed them. It explains why he cares about us, why he listens to us. It explains why there is force in prayer. You ever had anybody come to you and make a request of you, and it was somebody that you felt was, or something, we'll even go make it non-human. You ever had an animal come up to you and want food from you? Do you always answer the prayer of that animal and give it the food that it's asking for? I don't. In fact, a lot of times I shoo it away. Especially if it's small and has 6 legs and wings and it's trying to land in my food. Get out of here. It just wants something to eat. It's asking me if it can share what I have. Allow me to anthropomorphize for a moment. Obviously, it's not actually asking. But why does God have any concern about my request? Why does he listen to me at all? Beyond answering. Now, consider not only that he actually listens to me, but he also responds and provides those things that I ask of him. Why? Well, we find that out in considering the creation of God and what God did in creation. You've made him a little lower than the heavenly beings. By the way, I'm convinced that the 8th Psalm has a messianic message, and we'll get to that in a moment. But you've made him a little lower than the heavenly beings and crowned him with glory. We don't live in heaven. We're not spiritual beings that exist in that plane right now, where do we live? A little lower than that on the earth. Struggle with our bodies and struggle with health and strength and all those other things that we struggle with. And yet, you've crowned him with glory and honor. You've given him dominion over the works of your hands. You've put all things under his feet, all sheep and oxen, all beasts of the field, all birds of the heavens, all fish of the sea, whatever passes along the paths of the seas. Interestingly enough, he put all those things under our dominion. You know what he didn't put under our dominion? The earth itself, or the solar system, or the sun, or the moon, or the weather. We don't have control over those things. We have no power to exercise over those things. Why not? Why can't we figure out how to make it rain? By the way, they've tried. Why can't we figure out how to make it rain when it's an area that we think needs rain? Why can't we figure out a way to seed the clouds and actually cause them to rain? Because God hasn't given us that dominion. And I'm pretty sure if we had that kind of power, we'd just mess it up. The ultimate thermostat, that's right. Listen, we can't agree on what temperature to have this room. Wars would be fought over a thermostat for the earth. O Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth. Considering what you've created, considering the nature of man, considering where you've placed man, considering the whole order of things, the fact that we are over so much, but we are also under things. And God is over all. Because he made and created these things. They're the work of his fingers. Now, I told you this is messianic in nature. I believe that it is. I believe that it applies to Jesus. And I believe the point that's being made when it's applied to Jesus in the New Testament is that he was actually made man. And so this is describing what it means to be man. And the great creator of all things came and dwelt among us as one of us. How significant is that? Could we even come close to understanding that concept without the creation, without passages like Psalm 8? Would John 1:1 even make sense to us when it says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God. All things came into being by him, and apart from him nothing came into being that's come into being. And then down in verse 14, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. Would that even make any sense to us if we didn't understand creation and what it means? There are other passages that talk about how fearfully and wonderfully made we are. You know why we're fearfully and wonderfully made? Because we're created in the likeness of God. Just that one little piece of information, that we possess something about us that is like God, unlike any of the rest of this earthly creation that we see and we dwell among. And then is this unique person who was God, who dwelt on this earth in the form of a servant and died. Went through that process of birth, of growth, of life, and of death. How can God do that? Well, he was made for a while lower than the angels in the person of Jesus. It's still hard to wrap your head around and understand how that's possible and what all the ramifications of that are. But I'm telling you, without the knowledge that God created all things and that this is the order that he made them in, and that man had a preeminent aspect of his earthly creation, none of it would make sense. it wouldn't make any sense at all that God even cares about us. Did Jesus come to die to save the ants? God made them too. Is he rescuing the cows? So why come to die for men? Because he made man and has a special relationship with man. We're like him. We bear his image. There's part of us that is not material. There's a part of us that exists outside of time and beyond the boundaries of the creation. We exist in eternity. And so unlike the animal, when it dies, its body is gone, I live on. We don't have the time to do it, but Job struggles with that one throughout that whole book. How do we know that we don't just go into the ground like the animals? It goes all the way back to, let us make man in our image, in our likeness. That explains why we have dominion over the birds and over the fish and over the beasts of the field. That explains why after the flood, he gave us the right to consume for our well-being meat from other living creatures. The power and right to take the life of another creature to preserve my own life. Why is my life more valuable than that of a deer or a cow? Because I'm created in his image. And because he, as majestic and as powerful as he is, has granted unto me the right to so act. And so, with all due respect to our friends in organizations like PETA, animals are not equal with man. We're more limited than other things of God's creation, but a whole lot less limited than some things of God's creation. And we don't have that because of some glory or majesty of ourselves. We only have that because of the reflection of God's glory and majesty. You got to understand that part of what's being taught here in Psalms 8 is, what is man? Well, I'll tell you what man is. He's a reflection of God's power and God's majesty and God's glory. Let us make man in our image, in our likeness. Why do you care about man? Why do you provide for man? Because we're like him. We reflect his glory. Which then in turn also lays the foundation for why we have the capacity to function in righteousness. To make choices and do right. Is it within my power to make a choice and do right? Yes. Is it within my power to know what is right and what is wrong? Yes. Is it in my power to know what's right and what is wrong from within myself? Subjectively. Do I get to decide what's right and wrong? No. It is not in a man that walks to direct his steps. He didn't empower us to act on our subjective views of what is right and wrong. He handed us an objective revelation to inform us of what is right and wrong. So I don't get to decide that it's wrong to kill and eat an animal when God has revealed that it's not wrong to kill and eat an animal. Can I choose not to kill and eat an animal? Yes. Why? Why can I make that choice? Because he's extended me that choice. He hasn't said that you must do this thing. He said what? That you may do this thing. And you also may choose not to do this thing. And so if I choose only to eat vegetables, that's my choice. By the way, from creation until after the flood, it wasn't a choice, was it? From creation until after the flood, what was man given to eat? The green plant. That was it. We didn't have a choice before then. Yes, sir. Which would make an argument for a vegan lifestyle actually being healthier. I don't know if it's that. I do believe that God has restricted the lifespan of man, that it's not inherent in the nature of man's body to expire at that point, that God has placed that limit on it. Because of two reasons. One, we're told specifically that God did place that limit on man. Secondly, we're told that men at one time did live much longer than that, which would indicate that God had not yet restricted life to that long. So it's not something inherent in the nature of the body. What is inherent in the nature of the body is what? That it will die. That's what's inherent in the nature of the body. And in fact, God had to act in the beginning to work against that inherent nature by doing what? Anybody know what he did? What was in the midst of the garden where Adam and Eve lived? The tree of life. When man sinned, God didn't just say, okay, life's going to be more difficult for you, and these are the new orders of things, and this is the way I'm going to discipline you so that you learn not to make these mistakes. He also put them out of the garden and actually put a guard at the gate of the garden for a specific reason. Why didn't he want them getting into the garden that he had planted?
Because they would have access to the tree of knowledge of good and
What?
yeah.
They'd had access to the tree of life, and they would have taken and eaten and lived forever. That's what the text says. So he had actually placed something in the garden to stop the deterioration of the body of man, and gave us access to it that now has been taken away. And by the way, there was a reason for that too. I'm not one of the people that am of the opinion that God created Adam and Eve in the garden and said, you know, maybe they're going to stay there forever, and they're going to do exactly what I asked them to do, and nothing bad's ever going to happen. I think he knows all things. So then you have to ask, well, why then give them access to the tree of life? Well, we're told much later in the Revelation, in the book of Revelation, that we're going to gain access to the tree of life again. And so it teaches me that God has the power to grant life and to overcome death. Yes?
It made me think of when God says, I set before you life and death. And that's exactly what you see in the garden. You see life in the tree of life and death in the other one.
Yep. And the choice is ours. And this is the crazy thing. They could eat freely off of the tree that gave them life, and we're told only don't eat off of the tree that will bring them death. And what'd they choose? They chose death over life. That's what we do every time we sin. We choose death over life. We choose separation from God over fellowship with God. Now, we don't talk about sin in those terms, but we probably should. Because the greatest issue of sin is that it separates me from God. It destroys my fellowship with God. That's why David said, against thee and thee only have I sinned. Because the preeminent aspect of sin is the destruction between the fellowship between God's creation and God. He wasn't saying that he hadn't sinned against Bathsheba, or he hadn't done Uriah wrong, or he hadn't been a poor example to the nation of Israel as their king. He wasn't saying that he hadn't done those things. He was saying that the greatest and most significant aspect of sin was against God. Do we think of our sin that way? You know, when we fudge the truth just a little bit, do we think about the fact that we're lying against God? I'm not sure we do, but you remember Ananias and Sapphira? What were they told? You haven't lied unto men, but to God. Why is it that we're so connected to God? We're explained that in Genesis 1. Let us make man in our image, in our likeness. That's why it matters a whole lot more when I take someone's property than it does when a dog carries off someone's property. That dog doesn't possess the ability to reason, to think, to process, to make choices, to decide to do right, to choose to do wrong. It just acts. And when it dies, it goes into the ground and its body rots and there's nothing left of it. But you and I, we're something different. We share the image and likeness of God. We have the capacity to understand right from wrong and good from evil. We have the power to choose to do what's right. And therefore, when we do what's wrong, we are choosing. And it's not just against the one who we are harming, it is against God who made us. Look at the 33rd Psalm. Verses 6 through 22. By the word of the Lord, the heavens were made. Now, we just read that a little while ago, right? And then we were reminded of that fact when we alluded to what was written in John chapter 1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God. And all things came into being by Him, and apart from Him nothing came into being that has come into being. By the word of the Lord the heavens were made, and the breadth of His mouth all their host. He gathers the waters of the sea as a heap. That is directly from the image of Genesis 1, isn't it? How did we get seas in dry land? He gathered the waters into one place and made seas. He gathers the waters of the sea as a heap, and He puts the deeps in storehouses. There are stores of water under the land. Some of which we can find and get to and we use to drink, right? We drill wells into the ground and find we call them aquifers, the flows of water that are under the land. Well, listen, there's more down there. Because there's enough water that was created to do what? Cover the entire earth. And it's been that way twice. It was that way in the beginning when He made the earth. And then He opened up the fountains of the deep when He judged the earth in Noah's day. And this makes reference to that again. He gathers the water of the sea as a heap, and He puts the deeps in storehouses. The reason why we are not underwater right now is because God has put His water somewhere and stored it. Let all the earth fear the Lord. Why should I fear the Lord? Well, because if He puts all this stuff in its place and holds it there, what can He also do? He can upset it. If the earth is where it's at because that's where He wants it, and it's exactly where it needs to be in order for us to live, what happens if He decides to move it? And do you realize that? I don't know if anybody's ever thought about that. It'd have been just as easy for God to have judged the world in Noah's day by simply moving it out of its place, by letting its orbit change, by changing the tilt of the earth away from or closer to the sun. There's any number of ways that God could have brought judgment into the world. We need to fear Him because He has the power to do whatever. Yes, sir.
Back in Psalm 8:6, you've given Him dominion over all the works of the hand of the Lord. But He didn't say you had dominion over the destruction of the earth.
Nope, he does not.
Somewhere, I don't remember exactly where, as long as they're morning and night, harvest and planting and harvest the Lord, the earth will remain to the Lord.
There will be winter and summer, and Peter repeats the idea that the earth is being reserved for the day of judgment. What does that mean, it's being reserved? I'll tell you what that means. It means that there's nothing that I can do to hasten the destruction of the earth. I can mistreat what He has given me dominion over. I can misuse it. I can not be a good steward over it, and I'm going to have to answer for that, by the way. I'm not scared. But listen, we're not going to bring this earth to an early end. God decides when the earth ends. So listen to what He says. Let the earth fear the Lord. Let all the inhabitants of the world stand in awe of Him. Next time you go to the ocean, don't just notice the beauty. Realize that the reason why the water stops where it stops and it doesn't just come on over and wash and cover you is because God says, thus far shall your waves go and no further. God put the water in their place and said, stay there, and they obey. In that sense, we can learn from the water, can't we? Because we don't always obey. When God tells us to stay somewhere, sometimes we wander outside of that. I don't want to quit, but I got to quit. Any questions or comments about what we're talking about? We're going to come back and probably go ahead and start in verse 6 again when we get back up. I just won't spend as much time in the first couple of verses of Psalm 33. But listen, all of this gets its basis off of the fact that God created all things. And so the fear of the Lord and being in awe of the Lord and His majesty and His might and His glory, all of those things that's been talked about in the 10 verses out of the Psalms that we've read come directly from the fact that God spoke and it was. So we need to think about those things, and we need to continue to develop this further. We're going to look at the 104th Psalm next time as well, and a few other things, maybe get into them as we talk about the impact of the creation account on the rest